There's a specific kind of horror that doesn't feel like entertainment anymore. There's a horror that's the fun kind of scary. You scream, you laugh, you breathe. And then there's Siren on the PlayStation 2, or Forbidden Siren to us Australians. It's a game which feels like you've been dropped into someone else's reoccurring nightmare and told to just figure it out. There's a reason people talk about this game like it's a curse instead of a classic. Siren doesn't want you to have a good time, it wants you to endure one. The thing that makes Siren so disturbing is that it refuses to play by the emotional contract most horror games make with you. Most horror games say, yes, we'll scare you, but we'll give you a shotgun, a safe room, a save point, a glowing waypoint that says, go here. Siren shrugs all of that and hands you a map that barely helps, a town you don't understand, and a cast of strangers whose lives you're supposed to care about before you even know their names. It's not just hostile in design, it's hostile in tone. What really sets Siren apart is that it uses confusion as a weapon, not a flaw. Where modern horror tries to smooth out friction to keep you in that clean loop of sacred, relieved, empowered, Siren deliberately traps you in scared, confused, exhausted. Every decision it makes, from the way you navigate its timelines to the way you see through enemies' eyes, is tuned to keep you on the edge of, I might just turn this off. And honestly, that's where Siren's legend actually lives. Not in the jump scares, but in the number of people who bounced off it because it felt like way too much. Hey, if you're into this kind of video and where it's going, consider subscribing, because for the next month, I'm diving into all kinds of horror media and pop culture with a horror twist. There'll be other stuff outside of horror later, but for now, sit back and enjoy a fear-filled February and a madness-filled March. The first thing Siren does to you is take away your sense of place. Most horror games introduce their setting like a haunted theme park. Here's the mansion, here's the hospital, here's the town. Siren just drops you into Hanada, a rural Japanese village that feels like it was already dying before the curse ever hit. There are no big neon, this is important signs, no dramatic establishing shots. You get narrow streets, sloping paths, and houses that all blur together into one oppressive maze. What makes Hanada so disturbing is that it feels like a real place that has decided you shouldn't be there. You aren't touring a spooky attraction, you're trespassing in a community with its own rituals, its own history, and its own internal logic that nobody stops to explain to you. The architecture is practical, cramped, and vertical in ways that constantly mess with your sense of direction. Stairs winding up into darkness, footpaths slipping between houses, shrines tucked into corners like afterthoughts. It doesn't feel designed for you to explore, it feels designed for people who already knew the layout before everything went wrong. The way Siren locks you into bite-sized missions only makes that disorientation worse. You're not playing one continuous character through a linear journey, you're hopping in and out of little slices of lives at different times of night through different perspectives. Every time you start to get a grip on where you are or who you are, the game grips you out of that body and drags you into someone else's nightmare. The map doesn't update like a friendly guide either. It just stares back at you with labels that make sense if you live there and mean nothing if you don't. The real trick is how Siren turns that geographic confusion into emotional pressure. Getting lost in most games is mildly annoying. In Siren, getting lost means accidentally walking into a patrol route you didn't know existed, staggering into a beam of light, or taking 2 steps too far into the wrong alley. The village doesn't just confuse you, it weaponizes that confusion by tying it directly to punishment. The most disturbing mechanic in Siren isn't the enemies, the guns, or even the missions, it's the act of sight-jacking. The game hands you this ability with almost no ceremony. You can tune in to other viewpoints in the environment, like flipping through TV channels of someone else's horror. In any other game, that might feel like a cool superpower. In Siren, it feels like forcing yourself to look at something your brain doesn't actually want to see. What makes sight-jacking so unsettling is that it forces you to share perspective with the things trying to kill you. You're not just looking through security cameras from a safe distance, you're literally tapping into the vision of Shibito, these once human, now wrong villagers who shuffle, mutter, and never really die. Their field of view is shaky, distorted, occasionally fixated on things you don't understand. You're constantly reminded that they move more like people, but they don't think like people anymore. The visual language of sidejacking is where the game quietly gets under your skin. The screen breaks into little static riddled windows as you cycle through viewpoints, each one jittering with noise and color bleed like cursed VHS footage. You're half playing the game, half watching a found footage tape that keeps cutting back to the monster. There's this built-in anxiety to the mechanic. Every time you press the button, you're asking, what am I gonna see now? And how close is it to me? The worst part is that you can't just not use it. Siren structures its missions around sidejacking so tightly that refusing to look through those eyes is basically choosing to be blind. If you don't want to see the Shibito, you also don't get to know where they are. So you're stuck in this horrible trade, accept Secondhand Terror in exchange for survival, or stay safe from their viewpoint and walk blindly into them anyway. That's a level of psychological cruelty most horror games never even attempt. The most quietly disturbing thing about Siren is how it chooses to tell its story. Instead of giving you one protagonist to cling to, one clean arc you can ride from beginning to end, the game fractures everything into a web of characters and timelines. You're not just following a narrative, you're piecing together a disaster from out-of-order memories that don't care if you try to keep up. The game's scenario select structure feels more like a police evidence board than a chapter list. Every mission is a node on a timeline that jumps back and forth across the same cursed night in Hanada. One minute you're playing a schoolgirl trying to survive with a teacher, the next you're controlling a cop, a reporter, or someone who seems completely disconnected until 3 hours later when a tiny detail suddenly clicks. The story doesn't walk you through itself, it expects you to chase after it. What makes this format so unnerving is that it mimics the way trauma is remembered, out of order, incomplete, and overlapping. You see the same locations at different times and from different angles, so the village becomes this palimpsest of events layered on top of each other. Sometimes you know exactly how badly this is going to go for someone because you've already seen the aftermath in another mission. Other times you realize too late that something you did with one character has directly doomed another. The game is quietly teaching you that you're not just surviving this nightmare, but participating in it. The emotional cost of that structure is subtle but heavy. You don't build a clean, heroic attachment to anyone because the game never gives you the comfort of a single stable point of view. Instead, you get this slow, dawning horror that everyone is trapped in different corners of the same sinking ship. You're not just a chosen one. You're not a chosen one. You're just another bystander caught in a ritual gone wrong, and the more of the story you piece together, the more it feels like nobody was ever meant to get out. The reason Siren sticks with people isn't because it has the loudest scares or the flashiest monster designs. It's because it feels like a game that genuinely doesn't care if you're comfortable. It weaponizes confusion, forces you to look through the enemy's eyes, fractures its stories like a broken memory, and then asks you to keep going regardless. That's not fun horror, that's horror as an endurance test. What's quietly brilliant is that this rough, punishing PlayStation 2 experience ends up feeling more transgressive than a lot of sleek modern horror releases. You can see the seams, the limitations, the old hardware, but those rough edges actually make it feel more cursed, not less. Siren isn't polished into accessibility, it's jagged and awkward in ways that make the horror feel more authentic, like you're fighting the game and the nightmare at the same time. In the end, calling Siren the PS2 horror game that was far too disturbing isn't just a catchy tagline for this YouTube video, it's a pretty honest summary of why it never went fully mainstream. It's a game that asks more from you than most horror ever dares to, emotionally and mentally, and doesn't soften the blow when you finally give it. And if horror at its best is supposed to leave a mark, then Siren is one of those rare games that doesn't just scare you for a night, it lingers like something you saw that maybe you were never supposed to in the first place.